The alkali dust of Kansas was gone, but the dust of the Arizona Territory was a different beast. It was red, sharp, and tasted of iron. Clara Whitmore pressed her handkerchief to her mouth, the linen already stiff with grime and her own sweat. She was a woman defined by what she had lost, a husband to consumption, a father to righteousness, and now a life to memory. At 24, she was twice grieving. Her father, the Reverend Whitmore, had preached fire and damnation until his lungs gave out, leaving her with nothing but a King James Bible and a rigid spine. Her brief marriage had been a quiet, passionless affair, ending before it truly began, with both men gone. The small Kansas town felt like a coffin built for one. So she had sold the house, bought a ticket, and accepted a position as a schoolteacher in a raw, booming mining town called Pinole Creek. It was an escape, a penance, a new beginning. She wore her black mourning weeds not just for her father, but for the life she was burying back east. The stagecoach rattled violently, throwing her against the drummer beside her, a portly man smelling of whiskey and stale cigars. Across from her sat a gambler, his hands never still, and a young woman with painted cheeks who looked just as tired as Clara felt. 5 more hours to the station, ma'am, the drummer said, wiping his brow. Then it's just 2 more days to Pinole. You'll be fine. Hardy stock. Us pioneers. Clara merely nodded, looking out the window. The landscape was brutal. Giant cacti, the saguaros, stood like sentinels, their arms raised in surrender or warning. The mountains were jagged purple wounds against a sky too bright to look at. The first shot cracked the air like a dropped plate of glass. The drummer grunted, a strange, wet sound. He looked down at his chest, where a dark flower bloomed on his waistcoat. He slumped against Clara, his weight pushing her against the wall. The coach lurched. Shouts erupted from the driver. More gunfire, sharp and close. The painted woman screamed. The gambler cursed, pulling a small derringer from his boot, but the door was torn open before he could aim. A man filled the space. He was bearded, filthy, and his eyes were lit with a feverish intensity. He smelled of unwashed bodies and gun smoke. Out, all of you, now! The gambler fired. The shot went wide. The outlaw didn't hesitate. He fired back. The gambler's head snapped back, and he fell silent. The woman with the painted cheeks scrambled out, hands high, sobbing. Clara was frozen, the drummer's body heavy in her lap. I said out, damn you! The outlaw grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her skin, and hauled her from the coach. She fell to her knees in the red dirt. The world had tilted. The driver and the shotgun guard were both dead. Sprawled near the horses, the outlaws, perhaps 6 of them, were ransacking the luggage boot. The other woman was weeping hysterically. Shut her up! The leader, the bearded one, snapped. One of his men struck the woman across the face. She collapsed, whimpering. Clara felt a cold, sharp clarity pierce her terror. She would not scream. She would not weep. She had her father's spine, if nothing else. She got to her feet, brushing dust from her black skirt. The leader looked her over. His eyes were invasive, stripping her bare. Well now, what have we here? A little black bird. You got money? Bird? I have $10 and a Bible, Clara said. Her voice was steady, though her hands, hidden in the folds of her skirt, were shaking so hard her knuckles ached. The man laughed, a harsh, barking sound. $10. What about ransom? Anyone back east gonna pay to get you back? Preacher's girl. He must have seen her father's Bible in her discarded valise. There is no one, she said. His smile faded. He stroked his beard. A shame, but folk out here buy things other than gold. He turned to his men. She's worth more than the strong box. Tie her up. We'll take her to the canyon. I hear the Chiricahua are looking for rifles. Maybe they'll trade. Clara's blood ran cold. The Apaches. Her father had called them godless heathens, the spawn of hell. She had heard stories at the way stations, whispers of raids and torture. She was bound and thrown onto a horse. They rode hard, leaving the plundered coach and the dead behind them under the merciless sun. They rode until the sun bled into the mountains, and then they made a cold camp in a narrow, rocky canyon. Clara was given no food and only a mouthful of metallic-tasting water. She sat with her back against a rock, her wrists raw. The men drank, their laughter echoing off the stone. She closed her eyes and prayed, not for rescue, but for strength. She would not be broken. 2 days later, they arrived. It was not a camp, but a meeting place. A flat mesa shaded by a few sparse mesquite trees. A band of Apache men waited. They were not the wild, painted demons of her imagination. They were lean, hard men, their black hair bound with cloth bands. They sat on their ponies with an unsettling stillness, their face stern and watchful. The outlaw leader, Silas, rode forward. "We brought what you was missing," he shouted, gesturing to 2 horses laden with canvas-wrapped goods. "Rifles and whiskey, stolen from the army freight." One of the Apache, an older man with deep lines in his face, dismounted. He spoke in a low, guttural tongue. Silas laughed. Yeah, we want horses, and we want powder, and we got a bonus for you." He yanked Clara's horse forward. "A white woman, young, strong enough." Clara felt the eyes of the Apache warriors settle on her. It was a heavy, physical weight. She felt like a horse being inspected at auction. Her terror was a living thing, choking her. But she met their gaze. She looked from face to face, her chin high, her expression set. One man stood slightly apart from the others. He was younger than the leader, perhaps Clara's own age, but he looked as if he were carved from the red rock itself. A long, faded scar ran from his temple down his jaw, pulling at the corner of his mouth. He wore no paint, only buckskin leggings and a simple tunic. His eyes, black and piercing, were fixed on her. They were not cruel, not leering, not even angry. They were just watching, assessing. The older Apache man grunted, seeming unimpressed by the bonus. He and Silas haggled, their voices sharp. Finally, the deal was struck. The goods were exchanged for several ponies and bags of ammunition. "She's all yours," Silas said, cutting Clara's bonds. He shoved her so hard she stumbled and fell to her knees before the Apache band. She remained there for a moment, the dust settling on her black dress. She heard the outlaws laugh and ride away. She was alone, traded like a sack of flour. She pushed herself up, her entire body trembling, but her gaze was defiant. She would not cower. The man with the scar walked toward her. He stopped a few feet away. His stillness was absolute. He was tall, broader in the shoulder than she had realized. He carried a knife at his hip and a rifle slung over his back. Clara stared at him, bracing for the blow, the rope, the violation. She expected cruelty. He did nothing. He just looked at her, his expression completely unreadable. The silence stretched, broken only by the stamp of a horse. He was Tahani, though she would not learn his name for many days. His presence filled the world. Finally, he turned his head and gestured to a scrawny pony nearby. It was a silent command. "Mount." He turned and walked to his own horse, swinging up with fluid grace. He did not look back to see if she obeyed. He simply started walking his horse, leading the way out of the mesa. Clara, her heart hammering a rhythm of pure, cold fear, scrambled onto the pony. She followed him. There was nothing else to do. The land they moved through was an anvil, and the sun was the hammer. For 3 days, they rode. The heat was a physical weight, pressing the breath from her lungs. The sun baked the moisture from her skin, cracking her lips and blistering her hands. Her black wool dress was a torture, a furnace she could not escape. At night, the desert betrayed her again. The temperature plummeted, the air becoming thin and sharp. The cold was as brutal as the heat, seeping into her bones. making her teeth chatter until her jaw ached. She heard the high, yipping howl of coyotes, a lonely, mad sound that echoed the emptiness inside her. The grit was constant. It was in her mouth, her eyes, her hair. It rubbed her skin raw beneath her clothes. She was filthy, exhausted, and suspended in a silent terror. Tahani rode ahead of her. He never spoke, not to her, not to the other two warriors who rode with them. He seemed a part of the landscape, as silent and unforgiving as the stone. The first day, he offered her a water skin. She drank greedily, then stopped. Afraid of finishing it, he watched her, his expression impassive. He did not ration her, but his gaze made her feel primitive. The second night, she huddled by the small fire, shivering violently in her thin dress. The other warriors were asleep. Tahani sat across from her, staring into the flames. After a long time, he rose, retrieved a heavy wool blanket from his pack, and tossed it not at her, but near her. She stared at the blanket, then at him. He had already returned to his spot, his back to her, a silent guardian against the dark. She snatched the blanket and wrapped it around herself, hating the warmth, hating her reliance on him. On the third day, she saw her chance. They had stopped in a dry wash, the horses drinking sparingly from a small seep of water Tahani had uncovered by digging in the sand. The other two men were checking the horses' hooves. Tahani was standing on a low rise, scanning the horizon. Clara's mind raced. She was a teacher, a civilized woman. She could not, would not, be a slave to these savages. She saw a gap in the rocks, a path leading up the side of the wash. If she could get over that ridge, she could hide. She could find her way back. Pinal Creek could not be that far. She waited until his back was fully turned. She ran. Her legs, stiff from riding, protested. Her lungs burned. She scrambled up the rocky incline, her hands grabbing at thorns and sharp stone. She heard no shout behind her, no sound of pursuit. She reached the top, gasping, and plunged into a thicket of mesquite. She ran for what felt like an hour, pushing through the thorny branches that tore at her dress and her skin, leaving bloody scratches on her arms and face. She did not look back. She ran until the sun was high and the adrenaline faded, replaced by a crushing exhaustion. She stopped, leaning against a rock, her chest heaving. She was alone. She had done it. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She looked around. The landscape was identical in every direction. Red rock, sparse brush, and a blinding sky. There was no path, no town, no sign of civilization. She was lost. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She began to walk, then to run again. But now here was no direction, only a desperate need to escape the crushing silence. By midday, the heat was unbearable. Her thirst was a fire in her throat. She had no water, no hat. The sun beat down on her head. She stumbled, her vision blurring. She collapsed in the meager shade of a palo verde tree, its green branches offering almost no protection. This is where she would die. She, Clara Whitmore, daughter of a preacher, would die in the dirt like an animal, and no one would ever know. She closed her eyes, a dry sob catching in her throat. A shadow fell over her. She opened her eyes. Tahani was there, sitting on his horse, looking down at her. He was not breathing hard. He was not even sweating. He had simply followed her, waited for her. He dismounted. He walked toward her, and for the first time, his eyes were not unreadable. They were blazing. He was furious. He reached down and grabbed her arm, hauling her to her feet as if she weighed nothing. The force of it sent a jolt of pain and terror through her. She cried out. He said nothing, but his grip was bruising. He half dragged, half carried her back to his horse. He threw her onto its back, then mounted behind her, his body a hard, unyielding wall against her back. His arm wrapped around her waist, holding her in place. It was not an embrace. It was a cage. The ride back to the wash was the deepest humiliation of her life. She was too weak, too defeated to fight. She was forced to lean against him, to feel the heat of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. She hated him. She hated his strength. She hated her own weakness. And more than anything, she hated that he had saved her. When they arrived back at the camp, he did not speak. He dumped her unceremoniously on the sand and went to his horse, leaving her to the judgment of her own failure. The Apache camp, the rancheria, was nestled in a high canyon, hidden from the open desert. It was not the collection of crude huts she had imagined. It was a community. Dozens of dome-shaped structures, wickiups, were scattered among the trees. The air smelled of wood smoke, roasting meat, and herbs. As Tahani led her into the center of the camp, the life around her stilled. Children, brown-skinned and naked, stopped their play to stare, their black eyes wide with curiosity. Women looked up from their work, some grinding corn on flat stones, others weaving intricate baskets. Their expressions were complex: assessment, suspicion, and in a few, a flicker of pity. Elders, wrapped in blankets despite the warmth, watched her from the shade. Their faces weathered maps of time. Her fear, which had been a sharp blade, now became a dull, heavy ache. This was not a band of marauders. This was a home, and she was the outsider, the captive, the alien. Tahani spoke to the older man she had seen at the trade, clearly the leader. The man listened, then nodded, his gaze passing over Clara without interest. Tahani then grabbed her arm, his touch firm, impersonal, and led her to a wickiup set slightly apart from the others. An old woman sat outside, her face a mask of wrinkles. Tahani spoke to her in their low, soft language. The woman grunted. Tahani pointed to the ground near the woman's fire. It was a clear instruction. "Stay." He turned and walked away, disappearing among the other warriors. Clara stood, frozen, the object of 100 quiet stares. The old woman ignored her, continuing to mend a moccasin. Clara slowly sank to the ground, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to make herself small. She watched. She watched the children resume their games, their laughter light. She watched the women working together, their hands moving with practiced skill, their voices a constant, murmuring rhythm. She saw men returning from a hunt, carrying 2 deer. There was order here. There was life. Her father's sermons about godless savages felt like the ravings of a madman. Her fear began to curdle, twisting into a strange, sharp curiosity. Her new existence was defined by 2 opposing forces. Tahani was her captor. She was his property, as surely as his horse or his rifle. She could not leave. She was given scraps to eat, water when the old woman remembered, and a blanket to sleep on outside the wickiup. But Tahani was also her protector. On the second evening, 2 young warriors, their faces bold, approached her. They spoke to her in their language, their tones mocking. One of them reached out, his hand grasping for her hair. Clara flinched, pulling away, her heart leaping into her throat. "Da!" a voice said, one sharp word. Tahani was there. He had moved with no sound. He stood between her and the young men. He did not look at them. He looked only at Clara, his face impassive. The young men stiffened. They exchanged a look, then muttered something and walked away, their bravado gone. Tahani lingered for a moment. His gaze swept over her, checking for, what, damage, defiance? She did not know. Then he turned and left as silently as he had come. That night, he brought her food himself. Not scraps, but a bowl of stew, thick with meat and corn. He set it on the ground before her. Clara stared at the bowl. She was starving, but her pride was a bitter stone in her throat. She would not be his dog, fed from his hand. He did not urge her. He simply sat on his heels a few yards away, cleaning his knife, and waited. The silence stretched. The smell of the stew was maddening. Finally, her hunger won. She grabbed the bowl and began to eat. her movements jerky, her eyes downcast. She could feel him watching her. This became their ritual. He was the shadow at the edge of her vision, the silent presence that kept the others at bay. He was the wall of the canyon, immovable, unreadable. And she was the defiant weed growing in its shadow, refusing to be crushed. She met his silence with her own, her terror with a cold dignity. The air between them crackled, a tension she could not name, a strange, unwilling acknowledgement. He was her captor, she was his captive. But in the silence of the high desert, something else was beginning to stir. Life in the rancheria was a rhythm Clara did not understand. It was governed by the sun, by the needs of the horses, and by a web of customs she could not untangle. The old woman, Nalin, was her keeper. Nalin's face was a dry riverbed of wrinkles, and her eyes held no malice, only an exhausted impatience. She woke Clara before dawn with a poke of a stick and pointed to the tasks of the day. Clara was assigned to the communal chores, the work of women. Her soft, white hands, accustomed to holding chalk and a prayer book, were now plunged into gritty reality. She was given a metate, a flat stone, and a pile of dry corn. Nalin demonstrated the grinding motion, a rhythmic rocking that produced a fine, pale flour. Clara tried. Her movements were clumsy, jerky. She put too much pressure on the mano, the grinding stone, and cracked it against the base. The other women gathered at their own grinding stations, paused, their quiet, melodic chatter stopped. They watched her, their expressions veiled. She saw no laughter, but she felt the weight of their assessment. She was weak, she was useless. Nalin grunted in disgust, snatched the stone from her, and shoved a scraping tool and a stiff, foul-smelling deer hide into her hands. Clara's stomach turned, but she set her jaw and began to scrape, her knuckles soon raw and bleeding, the work staining her torn black dress with grease and blood. The women treated her with a wary politeness. It was a wall higher than any stockade. They would offer her a drink of water with a nod, but they never spoke to her. They murmured constantly among themselves in their soft, flowing language, their voices rising and falling like water over rocks. But when Clara drew near, the river of words dried up. She was an object, a presence, a ghost. She was the Pindalik Oyi, the White Eyes, a creature of bad luck. She felt utterly alone, more isolated than she had been in the desert. There, the enemy was the sun. Here, it was the unseen, the unsaid, the constant, quiet judgment. Tahani was rarely in the main camp during the day. He left with the other warriors at dawn and returned at dusk. He never spoke to her. He never looked at her, but she felt his presence. He was the shadow that kept the worst of her fears at bay. He was the reason the young warriors, Chato and Geru, kept their distance. He watched her, though she rarely caught him doing it. He watched her failing to grind corn. He watched her hands shake as she tried to weave a basket, the fibers refusing to obey her. He watched her sitting alone, staring into the fire, her spine rigid with a pride that seemed to baffle him. Her white skin, her blonde hair streaked with grime, her stubborn silence, it all scraped against a wound in him, a wound carved deep and left to fester. He remembered the smell of smoke, not the clean scent of mesquite from the campfires, but the greasy, acrid smoke of burning homes. He had been 17. The soldiers, the Inda, had come at dawn, not in orderly blue lines, but as a rabble, smelling of whiskey and bloodlust. They were not soldiers, they were settlers, miners, men who had broken the treaty his father had signed. His family had scattered. He had run with his mother, dragging his younger sister, Isti, by the hand. She was 16, her face bright with the beauty of her first womanhood. They hid in a dry wash, but the men were on horses, yelling, firing into the brush. They found them. He remembered the look on the bearded man's face, the same leering hunger he had seen in the eyes of the outlaw. Silas. He had tried to fight, a boy with a knife against 3 men with rifles. They had struck him with a rifle butt, the blow that laid his face open and scarred him for life. When he woke, his mother was weeping over his body, thinking him dead, but Iste was gone. They found her later, behind the burned trading post. Her dress was torn, her body broken. Her eyes were open, staring at the sky that had not saved her. That was the day Tahani's silence began. His hatred of the white man was not a simple thing. It was a complex, layered grief. It was the memory of Iste's laugh, the feel of her hand in his. It was the betrayal of the treaty paper, a lie that had cost him everything. And now, this white woman was in his camp. She looked at him with that same defiant fear. She was fragile, like Iste, but she was furious with it. She was not a warrior. She was not Apache. She was a contradiction, and he hated her for making him feel anything at all. The tension in the camp was a visible thing, a heat shimmer in the air. It centered on Clara. One hot afternoon, she was returning from the stream, her arms aching as she carried 2 heavy, water-filled ollas. Her black dress was a burden, and sweat ran in streams down her temples. Chato and Geru, the 2 young warriors, were waiting. They had been drinking tiswin, a fermented corn brew, and their eyes were bold. "The white bird carries water," Chato said in Apache, his voice loud enough for the camp to hear. "Does she think it will wash her clean?" Geru laughed. "She is Tahani's pet. He protects her." Clara did not understand the words, but the tone was universal. She tried to walk around them, her eyes fixed on the path. Chato stepped in front of her. He was young, muscular, and full of restless pride. He poked her shoulder. "You see, she does not even speak. She is a mute, like him." He was goading Tahani, using her as the stick. Clara stopped. "Please," she whispered in English. "Let me pass." Her voice, her white woman's words, seemed to enrage Chato. He shoved her, not hard, but enough. Clara stumbled, and the heavy clay pots slipped from her grasp. They shattered on the hard-packed earth, the precious water sinking instantly into the dust. The camp went silent. Clara stared at the broken pottery, her body trembling with a sudden, cold fury. She had hauled that water for a mile. Before she could even think, Tahani was there. He had not run. He had simply appeared, a copper-skinned wraith. He did not look at Clara. He did not look at the broken pots. He looked at Chato. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it cut through the afternoon heat. "Dagoto da! It is forbidden." Chato, flushed with tiswin and arrogance, stood his ground. "She is Pinda. She does not belong. She brings soldiers. You shame us by keeping her." "She is mine," Tahani said. The words were flat, possessive. They were not a statement of affection. They were a statement of fact, as if he were speaking of his horse. "You are a fool," Chato spat. "You are more white than Apache, with your silent ways and your white woman." Tahani moved. It was not a punch. It was a blur. He struck Chato in the chest with the heel of his palm, a blow that sounded like a heavy axe striking wood. Chato flew backward, landing hard in the dust, the air driven from his lungs. Geru helped his friend up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hatred. They backed away, dragging Chato with them. Tahani stood for a moment, his chest rising and falling. The entire camp had watched. He had drawn a line in the dust. Clara was on his side of it. He turned, his black eyes sweeping over her, over the broken pottery. His face was a mask of cold fury. Then he walked away, leaving her alone in the circle of silent, watching faces. That night, the illusion of her safety shattered completely. She lay huddled in her blanket outside Nalen's wickiup. The air was cold, but she was too agitated to sleep. A fire burned in the center of the camp, and the elders were gathered with the chief, Cochise's cousin, whose name she did not know. Their voices were low, but earnest. The wind carried their words to her. She heard Chatto's father, his voice sharp and angry. He was complaining. He was demanding. She heard the chief's measured replies. Her curiosity warred with her fear. She crept from her blanket, moving into the deep shadow of a neighboring wickiup. She was a shadow herself, in her dark dress. She got closer, close enough to hear the words distinctly, though she could not grasp their meaning. But some words were universal. She heard Chatto, she heard Tahani, and she heard, over and over, Pinda lik o ye. Then she heard a word she did know, a word she had heard from the outlaws. Soldiers. The debate grew heated. Chatto's father was arguing that she was a danger. The soldiers would come, tracking the stagecoach. They would find the camp. She was a bad omen, a weakness. Then, a voice she had not heard, old and cracked, asked a question. The chief replied, and Chatto's father said a word that made her blood freeze. Gu klit sin. Kill. He wanted her killed, disposed of, a problem solved. Another voice argued. She heard trade and Mexico. Send her back. Give her to the Mexicans. The chief was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. His voice was final. He was speaking of Tahani. He was speaking of her. She could not parse the decision. Was it death, banishment? She did not wait to find out. She scrambled back to her blanket, her heart a wild bird in her chest. She was not safe. Tahani's protection was a provocation. She was a piece in a game she did not understand, and the forfeit was her life. She lay awake for hours, staring at the unfamiliar stars. She had to escape, but the desert had already beaten her once. Just before the first hint of dawn, a hand clamped over her mouth. She gasped, her body going rigid with terror. "She," Tahani whispered, his face close to hers in the dark. He removed his hand. "We go." "Go where?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Do not speak. Get up." His tone was urgent, rough. He pulled her to her feet and pushed her toward two horses, saddled and waiting at the edge of the camp. He pressed a waterskin and a strip of dried meat into her hands. Are you taking me away to—" She couldn't say it. "To kill me?" He ignored her, mounting his horse in one fluid motion. He gestured impatiently. Terrified, she climbed onto the pony. She was being taken from the camp, just as the elders had debated. But was this an execution or an escape? He led her out of the sleeping rancheria, his horse's hooves making no sound on the packed earth. They rode north, climbing out of the canyon and into the high hills. The air grew thinner, cooler, fragrant with pine. They rode for hours, pushing the horses hard, until the sun was high and the camp was miles behind them. Tahani was keeping the peace. He had removed the source of the conflict, her. He finally stopped in a high meadow. A grove of aspen shivered in the breeze. In the center of the clearing stood a ruin, the half-collapsed skeleton of a log cabin. It was a homesteader's failed dream, a scar of the white world in this wild place. Tahani dismounted and began to unsaddle his horse. Clara slid from her pony, her legs weak, her nerves, stretched taut by the nightly debate and the forced ride, finally snapped. She was tired of being silent, tired of being afraid, tired of being a pawn. She marched toward him, her fists clenched at her sides. "Why?" she demanded, her voice high and thin. "Why did you bring me here? What is this? Are you going to leave me? Are you going to kill me where no one can see?" He continued his work, ignoring her. "Damn you! Answer me!" she screamed, the word ripping from her throat. Clara Whitmore, had cursed. She struck his arm, her blow landing with no effect. He stopped. He turned, slowly. He was close, closer than he had ever been. The scar on his face was a pale, angry line. His eyes were not cold. They were not unreadable. They were blazing. He looked at her, his gaze a physical force. It traveled from her wild, dirty hair, down her torn dress, to her useless, trembling hands, and back to her eyes. It was a look of pure, undiluted possession. It was a look of anger, and underneath it, simmering with a heat that scorched her, was something else, a hunger. He was answering her question without a single word. He wanted her. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. He had not saved her out of kindness. He had kept her because he had claimed her. Her breath caught. Her body, which had been rigid with fury, suddenly went weak, trembling for an entirely different reason. His gaze held hers. Then, as if pulling himself back from a great distance, he turned away. He picked up his saddlebag. "Make fire," he said, his voice rough. She stared at his back. I don't know how." He tossed a fire drill at her feet, the wooden bow and spindle landing in the dust. "Learn." He left her, walking to the edge of the clearing to check the perimeter, leaving her alone with the impossible task. She picked up the tools. She tried to emulate what she had seen the women do, but the spindle kept slipping, the bowstring tangled. She was clumsy, frustrated, and humiliated. Tears of pure rage welled in her eyes. He returned and watched her, his arms crossed. His silence was a heavy, suffocating judgment. "I cannot," she finally whispered, defeated. He grunted, a low sound of impatience. He knelt beside her, his large, scarred hand closed over hers, pressing it to the bow. "So," he said, his voice a low rumble. He guided her hand. His body braced against her shoulder. The contact was a brand. She could feel the heat of him, the hard strength in his arm, the callous texture of his skin against hers. She snatched her hand away as if burned. "I can do it." He sat back on his heels and watched, driven by a desperate need to not fail under that gaze. She tried again. Her hands shook, but this time she found the rhythm. A wisp of smoke appeared. Then a tiny, glowing coal in the tinder. He taught her other things. He took her into the woods and showed her a snare, the almost invisible loop of sinew hidden on a rabbit trail. He pointed not at the animal, but at the signs of the animal. He taught her to listen. He would freeze, his head cocked, and minutes later, a deer would appear. He was stripping away her civilized helplessness and, layer by layer, forcing her to see the world as he did. They stayed in the ruined cabin for 2 days. The silence was thick, broken only by his brief commands. On the third afternoon, the world changed. The bright blue sky vanished, replaced by a low, bruised ceiling of greenish-black clouds. The wind rose, not as a breeze, but as a roar, screaming through the pines. A blast of cold air struck them, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. Rain began to fall, then sleet, then hail that hammered the cabin's remaining roof like thrown stones. "Inside," Tahani commanded, pulling the horses into the most sheltered part of the ruin. They huddled in the one corner of the cabin that still had 3 walls and a partial roof. The wind and rain blasted through the collapsed front wall, turning the dirt floor to mud. Night fell. But the storm only intensified. It was a living monster, trying to tear the mountains apart. Clara was soaked to the bone, her thin dress offering no protection. She was shaking so violently she could barely breathe, her teeth chattering. The cold was a physical, biting pain. Tahani managed to build a small, smoky fire in the ruined stone hearth, but it was a pitiful defense. He sat against the back wall, his blanket wrapped around him, his face grim. He looked at her. She was huddled on the other side of the fire, her lips blue, her body convulsing with shivers. She looked like she might die. He grunted, a low, impatient sound. He held open his heavy wool blanket. It was not an invitation. It was a command, a necessity for survival. Clara stared at him, her pride warring with the killing cold. To touch him, to accept his warmth, felt like the final surrender. But the cold was winning. She crawled around the fire, her movements stiff. She slid under the blanket, huddling beside him. The heat from his body was shocking, a solid wall of warmth. She pressed against his side, from her shoulder to her knee. She could feel the hard muscle of his thigh, the breadth of his chest, the steady, slow rhythm of his breathing. Her shivering began to subside, replaced by a different kind of tremor. They sat in silence for a long time, the storm screaming outside, a counterpoint to the thunder of her own heart. She was acutely aware of every line of his body, every point of contact. Her fear, her constant companion for weeks, began to crack. It splintered, and underneath it, something else uncoiled, something raw, hot, and terrifyingly alive. It was an attraction so powerful it felt like a betrayal, a sin against the life she had lost. He turned his head. In the dim, flickering firelight, his eyes were black pools. He raised one hand. His fingers were rough, calloused from a life of survival. He touched her face. His thumb brushed the damp hair from her cheek, his touch surprisingly, agonizingly gentle. She shivered, but not from the cold. "I'm afraid," she whispered, the admission torn from her. She was afraid of him, of the storm, of this feeling that was blooming in the ruins of her old self. His gaze dropped to her mouth. He leaned in. She could feel his breath, warm and tasting of smoke. Her eyes fluttered closed. She waited, her entire body clenched, for the inevitable, for the kiss, for the claim. He stopped. He was inches away, balanced on a knife edge of tension. She could feel the heat radiating from his face, the coiled strength in his body. Then, with a low sound, almost a growl, he pulled back. He turned his head, staring back into the fire, his jaw tight. But he did not move away. His arm remained a hard bar around her, his body a shield against the wind. The night passed in that agonizing, heated silence. She eventually fell into an exhausted, fitful sleep. She dreamed of that touch. She dreamed of his arms holding her, of the kiss that had not happened. And she woke in the dark, her body aching with a strange, new emptiness. When she woke for good, it was with a start. The storm was gone. The world was cold, bright, and utterly silent. She was alone under the blanket. She scrambled up, a sharp panic seizing her. He had left her. He had brought her all this way only to abandon her. She ran out of the ruined cabin, her torn boots slipping in the mud. He was there. He stood at the edge of the clearing, by a small, churning river, swollen with melt and rainwater. He was stripped to his leggings, his back to her. His skin was coppery in the sharp morning light, his back a map of muscle and old, white scars. He splashed the icy water over his head and chest. As the frigid air hit his skin, steam rose from his body. He turned, sensing her. He looked at her. His black hair was wet and loose, hanging past his shoulders. His chest was bare, his body lean and powerful. He was not a man from her world. He was the land itself, wild, beautiful, and dangerous. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression as unreadable as the stone cliffs. Then he bent, picked up his tunic, and walked back toward her. They rode back to the rancheria in a silence thicker than the morning mist. The storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean, sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Clara felt scrubbed raw, both inside and out. The night in the ruined cabin, the proximity to Tahani, the brush of his hand, and the kiss that had almost been, had left a new, live wire tension between them. She was no longer just his captive. She was something else, something she had no name for, and it terrified her. She was aware of his body in a way she had never been, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hands rested on his horse's reins, the line of his jaw beneath the scar. He was not just a savage, he was a man, and that realization felt like a profound betrayal of her faith, her past, her own skin. When they entered the camp, the usual morning rhythms of life stuttered and stopped. The children paused their games. The women, grinding corn or tending the fires, looked up. Their gazes were no longer just wary. They were sharp, suspicious. Clara saw Chato and Geru watching, their expressions dark with contempt. She saw Nalin, the old woman, who merely grunted and spat into the dust. The entire camp had seen Tahani take her. They had seen him return. He had taken her away to keep the peace. But they had been alone in the hills for 3 days. The whispers began almost immediately. Clara tried to resume her chores, to find her place by Nalin's fire. The old woman shoved a basket of mesquite beans at her, her gesture rougher than usual. Clara sat, her head down, and began the arduous task of pounding the beans into flour. She could hear them, the soft, liquid syllables of the Apache language. But the tones were different. She heard Tahani's name, linked with her own. Pinda lik o yi. The women who had once offered her a cautious, shared silence now openly murmured as she passed. They looked at her torn dress, her unbound, dirty hair, and then at Tahani, who had resumed his own tasks as if nothing had happened. She was marked, in their eyes. She was no longer just the white captive. She was his. The precarious balance of her existence had been shattered. Tahani's protection, which had been a distant shield, was now a possessive, visible claim. It made her a target for the jealousy of the women and the hatred of men like Chato. She felt utterly exposed, as if she were standing naked in the center of the camp. 3 days after their return, the fragile peace of the rancheria was broken. A scout, his horse lathered in sweat, rode hard into the camp, shouting for the chief, Delche. "Inda!" he yelled, leaping from his horse. "Soldiers, 2 miles down the canyon, and settlers with them. 12, maybe more." A cold bolt of panic shot through the camp. This was not a random patrol. This was a search party. Women grabbed their children, their movements swift and practiced. Warriors ran for their rifles and ponies. The camp was a stirred beehive, buzzing with urgent, controlled fear. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Soldiers, her people, rescue. The thought was a sudden, blinding flash of hope. But as she looked at the panic-stricken faces, at the children hiding in their mothers' skirts, the hope was immediately soured by a deep, confusing guilt. Delche, a stern, powerful man in his 50s, began snapping orders, but Chato's father, K-10-Ne, strode into the center of the camp, his face a mask of fury. He pointed one accusing finger, not at the chief, but at Clara. "It is her," he shouted, his voice carrying over the din. "She brought them. The white woman is a curse." The camp stilled. All eyes turned to her. "They are tracking her." K-10-Ne continued, his voice ringing with accusation. "They search for her, and they will find us." "We must move the camp," Delche said, his voice a low growl. "Move! We must fight," Chato countered, joining his father. "Or we give them what they want." His eyes, full of malice, locked on Clara. "Be silent," a new voice cut in. It was an old woman, Taza's widow, an elder respected for her wisdom. She walked slowly toward Clara, her black eyes sharp and knowing. She stopped a few feet away, studying Clara's face. Then she looked at the tattered Bible that Nalin had kept in her own belongings. The old woman pointed at the gold lettering on the cover. "Whitmore," she said, her pronunciation thick. Clara stared, stunned that this woman knew the name. The elder turned to Delche. "I know this name. I know this man." She spoke in Apache, her voice rising and falling in the cadence of a story long remembered. "He came when I was a young woman, before the reservation. He came with his black book and told us our ways were wrong. He told us Usin was a false god." A murmur of anger went through the older members of the tribe. "He was the Ndebini Sedi," she said, "the man who talks to the sky. He built a house of prayer on our hunting grounds. He said he brought peace, but when we told him to leave, he brought the Inda to protect his words. Soldiers died. Our warriors died. He brought division and death, all hidden behind his god." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Her father. Her pious, righteous father. He had not just preached. He had brought soldiers against these people. The stories he'd told of savage heathens attacking his mission were lies. He had been the invader. The revelation struck her dumb. She was not just a random captive. She was the daughter of their old, deep-seated enemy. Tahani, who had been standing by his horse, went utterly still. He looked at Clara, and his eyes were black, cold, and full of a new, terrible understanding. He, too, recognized the story. She is the daughter of the man who talks to the sky. K-10-Nay roared, seizing on the revelation. She is poison, like her father. Tahani knew. He must have known. He protected her. He took her to the hills to hide her, to keep her for himself. He has betrayed us. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Tahani had broken tribal harmony. He had protected the spawn of their enemy. Delche raised his hand for silence. The soldiers were close. A decision had to be made. The council will speak, he declared, now. The elders, along with K-10-Nay and Tahani, gathered around the central fire pit. The rest of the camp watched, their faces grim. Clara was left standing alone, the focal point of all their hatred and fear. We cannot fight a dozen soldiers and settlers, Delche began, his voice low, not to protect her. We cannot run. They are too close. Then we give her to them, K-10-Nay argued. We throw her out of the canyon. Tell them we found her. It will save our families. And show them we are weak. Taza's widow countered. Show them we are afraid. They will not stop with her. They will see our camp, our horses. They will hunt us anyway. Then kill her, Chato said, his voice flat. Kill her and hide the body. Let them search. They will find nothing and leave. Clara's body went rigid, the casual way they discussed her death, as if she were a sick animal, turned her blood to ice. No, Delche said. They have scouts. They will find a fresh grave. They will find blood. It will bring a war we cannot win. The chief looked at the elders. There is a third way, the old way. We make her ND. We marry her into the tribe. She becomes one of us. If she is Apache, she cannot be rescued. She is our family. The soldiers will have no claim on her. Clara's head swam. Marry her? Into the tribe? It was a political solution, a way to absorb her, to erase the white woman. Who would take this poison? K-10-Nay sneered. Who would take the daughter of the missionary? He spat into the fire. The council fell silent. The options were laid bare. Send her back to be rescued, but risk the camp being discovered, kill her, and risk a war, or marry her, and make her one of them. Delche looked around the circle. We must vote. Those who would send her back to the soldiers, raise your hand. K-10-Nay and two others raised their hands. Those who would kill her. Chato raised his hand, his eyes burning into Clara. And those who would make her ND. Taza's widow and another elder raised their hands. The council was divided. Delche, as chief, would have to break the tie. He looked grim. Sending her back seemed the fastest, cleanest way. Clara's heart pounded. She was going to be handed over. Wait! The word was low, quiet, but it stopped everyone. Tahani, who had been standing silent, his face an unreadable mask, stepped forward into the firelight. He looked at Delche. He looked at K-10-Nay. He did not look at Clara. She is Shechki Nabitna Allah. The Apache words were spoken with absolute finality. A ripple of shock went through the camp. Clara did not need a translation. The meaning was devastatingly clear. She is my wife, Tahani said, his voice resonant in the sudden, absolute silence. He had claimed her. Clara swayed on her feet. A wave of dizziness, of unreality, washed over her. This was not a rescue. This was not protection. This was a claiming. He had solved the council's problem by taking the third option himself. He had bound her to him, to the tribe, Forever. Delche stared at Tahani, his expression unreadable. K-10 looked apoplectic, his face dark with rage. Chatto looked as if he had been struck. But the word was spoken. It was a binding declaration. To challenge it was to challenge Tahani to a fight to the death. Delche nodded. Once. It is done. Tahani has taken the missionary's daughter as his wife. She is ND. The debate is over. He turned and began giving orders to move the camp to a higher, more defensible position, leaving the old camp as a decoy. The crisis of the vote was over. Clara's personal crisis had just begun. She was speechless, paralyzed by a storm of conflicting emotions. She felt humiliated, her fate decided as if she were a piece of property. She felt a cold dread at what wife meant in this savage place, and underneath it all, a strange, terrifying flicker of something that was not relief, but a dark, pulling acknowledgement. Tahani turned. He walked toward her, his face as hard as the canyon rock. He did not touch her gently. He did not speak. He grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her flesh, and pulled her. He did not take her to Nalin's wickiup. He pulled her past the stares of the other women, past the hatred in Chatto's eyes, and across the camp to his own lodge. It was small, smelling of tanned leather, smoke, and the faint, clean scent of sage that always clung to him. He thrust her inside, then dropped the heavy hide flap, plunging the interior into a dim, firelit intimacy. The sounds of the camp faded. There was only the sound of her own ragged breathing and the crackle of the small fire in the center pit. He stood on the other side of the fire, a tall, silent shadow. Clara's paralysis broke, shattered by a wave of pure, hot rage. Her fear was burned away by the humiliation. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice shaking. He did not answer. He stared at her, his black eyes holding the reflection of the flames. "You had no right," she cried, her voice rising. "You stood there and let them debate killing me, and then you claimed me. Like a horse, like a rifle you won in a trade. Am I your wife now? Is that it? After you bought me from those outlaws?" She was trembling, her hands clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. "Am I a person to you? Do you even see me? Or am I just a possession, something you keep?" Tahani turned his head, slowly. His gaze was heavy. He crossed the small space. Stepping around the fire, he stopped in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to look at him. The heat from his body washed over her. "They would take you," he said. His voice was a low, rough sound, his English slow. "The soldiers, they would have rescued me." "Rescued?" His scarred mouth twisted. "Or Chatto, he would kill you. Or K-10, he would give you to the soldiers to save himself. They would use you, all of them." "So this was a trick?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "A lie to protect me?" "It is not a trick," he said, his voice flat. "Then what is it?" she screamed, desperation tearing at her. "Am I your wife? Am I your slave? Tell me." His stillness broke. He moved, faster than she could react, his hands grabbing her shoulders. His grip was not gentle. It was a vice. "I do not want a slave," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "I do not want to possess you." "Then why?" she wept, her anger crumbling into raw despair. "Why do this?" His eyes burned into hers. The firelight carved harsh shadows on his face. "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a fierce, guttural whisper, "I will not let them take you." The words hung between them, a declaration of will so absolute it left no room for argument. It was not about her. It was about him. "You had no right," she sobbed, her strength gone. She sagged in his grip. "It was not your choice to make." "You have no choice here," he said, the words a blunt, hard truth. "I do," she whispered, a last spark of defiance. She looked up at him, her eyes flooded with tears. I can choose to run. I can choose to die. Do not tell me I have no choice." Her broken, defiant gaze struck him. The anger in his face faltered, replaced by the same raw hunger she had seen in the cabin. But this time it was mixed with a profound, aching sorrow, a loneliness that matched her own. He pulled her closer. "Let me go," she whispered, her hands pushing weakly against his chest. "Please." "No," he said. He lowered his head. She turned her face away, a sob catching in her throat. He stopped, his mouth hovering just above her skin. He did not force her. He waited. She could feel his breath, hot against her cheek. She could feel the tremor in his hands, the coiled strength in his body. The silence stretched, broken only by her weeping. She slowly turned her head, looking back at him. Her eyes were wide, full of terror, confusion, and a terrible, unwilling surrender. That look broke the last of his restraint. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a kiss of desperation. It was bruising, demanding, a collision of two worlds. It tasted of smoke and grief, of anger and a loneliness so deep it had no words. It was a brand, a claim, a desperate attempt to answer the question that lay between them. Clara's mind screamed in protest. This was sin. This was savage. He was her captor, but her body, starved of comfort, betrayed her. Her resistance, which had been a shield, suddenly dissolved. The terror and attraction that had warred within her for weeks exploded. Her hands, which had been pushing him away, fisted in his tunic, pulling him closer. She kissed him back with the same raw, desperate force, her own cry of despair swallowed by his mouth. It was not love. It was a raw, physical eruption, a force as undeniable as the storm they had weathered together. He lifted her, half dragging her as they stumbled back, falling onto the pile of furs and blankets that was his bed. They landed in a tangle of limbs, the kiss breaking, leaving them both breathless, shaking. He was poised above her, his hands braced on either side of her head, his body a hard, heavy weight. The firelight danced over his bare shoulders. The reality of it crashed down on Clara. Clara Whitmore, daughter of a preacher, was on a bed of furs, her captor's mouth still wet on hers. She had kissed him back. She had wanted it. The shame was a physical, killing thing, the last remnants of her old self, her civilized, pious self, shattered. She turned her face into the rough fur of the blanket and began to weep. It was not a cry of anger. It was a sound of absolute, overwhelming grief. She was lost. Tahani froze. The passion in his eyes vanished, replaced by a guarded, deep confusion. He did not understand this. He did not understand her tears. He had seen women cry in grief, but this was something else. This was the sound of a soul breaking. He pulled back, sitting up. He watched her for a long moment, his face grim, his breathing harsh. He looked at her shaking shoulders, her hand clutched in the fur. He did not speak. He did not try to comfort her. He simply sat, a silent witness to her breakdown. Finally, her sobs quieted into exhausted, hitching breaths. The cold of the wickiup began to seep into her bones. He reached out and pulled a heavy wool blanket over her, covering her from shoulder to foot. Then he moved. He crawled to the entrance of the lodge, his back to her, and sat facing the hide flap, a silent guard, protecting his new, broken wife from the world outside. She fell into a numb, dreamless sleep. Hours later, a nightmare, dark and suffocating, tore her awake with a silent scream. She was cold. The fire was just embers. He was still there, a silhouette against the moonlit flap. He heard her gasp. He did not speak. He moved, crawling back from the entrance. She flinched, pulling herself into a ball. He stopped. He waited. Then he lay down on the bedding behind her. He did not touch her. He was just a presence, a wall of heat at her back. She lay rigid, waiting. After a long time, he slowly reached out. His arm, heavy and warm, settled over her waist. He pulled her back against his chest, tucking her body against his. It was not a gesture of passion, it was a gesture of possession, of absolute, grounding comfort. Clara was too tired to fight, too cold to resist. She was braced against the hard wall of his chest, his arm a heavy bar across her. She could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart against her back. He was warm. He was real. He said nothing. He simply held her, shielding her from the cold. And for the first time since she had left Kansas, she slept through the night. The morning after the claiming was a new kind of silence. Clara woke into Hani's wickiup, her body stiff. She had slept in the furs, and he had slept sitting up, his back to the entrance, a silent guard. She had awakened to find him gone. When she emerged, the camp was different. The stairs were still there, but the raw hatred had been replaced by a sharp, assessing curiosity. She was no longer the Pindalik Oyi, the white captive. She was Tahani Bina Allah, Tahani's wife. She was, in their eyes, one of them, whether she liked it or not. Nalin, the old woman, saw her and grunted. But this time, she held out a piece of hard, corn-flour bread. It was not a gesture of kindness. It was a simple acknowledgement of Clara's new, permanent place. Clara knew, with a sinking, cold clarity, that her old life was gone. There was no rescue. The soldiers who had come looking for her would now be told, if they came again, that she was Apache. She was bound to this man, this tribe, this harsh red rock world. A quiet, stubborn defiance settled in her. If she was to be trapped, she would not be blind. If she was to be a prisoner, she would learn the ways of her prison. She began to learn the language. She was a teacher, after all. She pointed, "Tligai," she would say, holding up the bread. The children were her first teachers. They flocked to her, their initial fear replaced by a bold curiosity. They found her stumbling attempts at their language hilarious. "Inda A," she would say, pointing to the fire. "Ko," they would laugh, correcting her. "Ko." BCD, they taught her, for the flour she ground. Tu, for the water she hauled. And Shika, the word she heard Naylan use for her. My. The women watched this. Her willingness to learn, to work without complaint, softened the edges of their suspicion. She was still clumsy. Her hands, soft and white, were now permanently stained, her nails broken, her palms calloused. But she did not stop. She scraped the hides. She ground the corn. She gathered the firewood, her body aching with the unfamiliar labor. Her breakthrough came not with language, but with sickness. A fever swept through the camp, brought on by bad water from a summer-low stream. It struck the children hardest. A small boy, Soda, the son of a woman who had been particularly unkind, was the worst. He lay listless in his mother's arms, his skin burning, his breathing a shallow, wet rattle. The Diyin, the medicine man, had sung his songs and applied his pollen, but the fever would not break. The mother, her name Hania, was wild with grief. Clara watched, her heart aching. She recognized this. It was lung fever, the same congestion that had taken her husband. She approached the wickiup, her heart pounding. Hania looked up, her eyes full of hate. "Go, white woman, you bring this." "No," Clara said, her Apache words broken but clear. "I can help. Shika, my husband, sick, same, I know." She pointed to the willow trees by the stream. "The bark, for fever, I know." Hania clutched her son. Nalin, who had been watching, stepped forward. "Dagote," she said, her voice a rough command. "Let her." Clara ran. She gathered the willow bark, steeped it into a bitter, dark tea. She returned to the lodge, She forced the child to drink, spoonful by spoonful. She ground herbs from her father's small medicine kit, the one thing she had saved, into a paste and made a poultice for his chest. For 2 nights and 2 days, she did not sleep. She sat in the smoky wickiup, cooling the boy's head with wet cloths, forcing the bark tea and sips of water down his throat. Hania sat across from her, a statue of terrified grief. Tahani came to the door of the lodge. He did not enter, but he watched her. He watched her gentle hands, her whispered, soothing words in English, a language of comfort the boy did not understand but responded to. He saw not a captive, but a woman of quiet, fierce strength. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Tsode woke, his eyes clear, and cried for his mother. Hania wept, clutching her son. She looked at Clara, her exhaustion and gratitude warring in her expression. She reached out and, hesitantly, touched Clara's arm. "Takote," she whispered. "It is good." When Clara walked out of the wickiup, the camp was silent. But it was a new silence. It was the silence of respect. She had saved one of their own. She had earned her place. The external world, however, did not respect her new status. The presence of soldiers at the canyon rim had left a lingering poison. Tensions in the territory were high. The white settlers were pushing closer, their cattle grazing on Apache hunting grounds. One afternoon, Chato and 2 other young warriors returned, their horses breathing hard. They had been scouting near a new ranch and had been seen. "A soldier," Chato admitted to Delche, his voice tight. "A lone scout. He drew on me." And Delche's voice was grim. "He is dead," Chato said. "It was his life or mine." Delche's face was like stone. "You are a fool. You have brought the hornet's nest upon us. They will not hunt for one man. They will hunt the tribe." A palpable fear settled over the camp. They were no longer just hiding. They were being hunted. This new, shared danger pushed Clara and Tahani closer. Their nights in the wickiup had been a careful truce. They slept on separate piles of furs. The small fire, a dividing line. The intimacy of his claim was a raw, unspoken thing between them. But in the wake of her nursing Soda, the silence had softened. "You did well," he said one night, his voice low. Clara looked up, startled. He rarely spoke to her in the dark. "He was sick. I helped." "You are strong," he said, as if the words were difficult. "Not like stone, like water. You find the way." She looked at him, at the hard lines of his face, the scar a pale white in the firelight. "You are strong like stone, Tahani, but I don't know who you are." He was silent for a long time. "I am Nd." "That is your people," she said, her voice gentle. "Who are you? Why are you silent?" He looked into the fire, and slowly, in his rough, halting English, he told her. He spoke of his sister, Isti. He spoke of the raid, the smell of burning homes, the Inda who were not soldiers but settlers. "They took her," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, which made the story even more terrible. "She was 16. She loved to laugh." He touched the scar on his face. "This was my payment for trying to stop them. When I woke, she was gone. We found her. The laughter was gone." He fell silent, his grief a physical thing in the small lodge. Clara's heart broke, not just for him, but for the weight of the hatred between their peoples. She finally understood his silence. It was a shroud for a pain too deep to speak. She moved, crawling around the fire, and sat near him. She did not touch him. "My father," she said, her voice a whisper, "was the man who talks to the sky. I know what you think of him, but he was a cold man. His God was a God of rules and judgment. My mother died. My husband died. My world was full of silence, too. But my silence was empty. It was lonely. I was a preacher's daughter, and I was more alone in a full church than I am here, in this canyon." He turned his head, his black eyes searching hers in the dim light. He saw the same loneliness he carried. He saw his own pain reflected in her pale, tear-streaked face. "You are not lonely," he said, his voice rough. "You are Shika. You are with me." He reached out, his hand hesitating, and then his fingers brushed her cheek, just as they had in the ruined cabin. This time, she did not pull away. The fragile peace was shattered 2 weeks later. A different scout, one with a spyglass, was spotted on the high ridge. He was not looking for a camp. He was looking for her. Clara had gone to the stream to gather water. She looked up, a feeling of being watched prickling her skin. She saw him, a white man, half hidden by rocks, the sun glinting off his glass. He was staring directly at her. He saw her, a white woman, her blonde hair in 2 braids, wearing a buckskin dress Hanya had given her. He saw her living as one of them. She dropped the water skin and ran, terror lending her speed. "He saw me!" she cried as she burst into the camp. "A man, Pinda, on the ridge! He saw me!" Tahani's face went grim. He knew, instantly, what this meant. The lie of her being Apache was broken. To the white world, she was a captive. The news came 3 days later. A trader, a half-Mexican man named Luis, who sometimes did business with Delche, rode in under a flag of truce. "The army is massing at Fort Grant, Delche," Luis said, his face worried. "They are not coming to talk. They say Chato killed a soldier. They say the tribe is hostile." He looked at Tahani. "And there is more. There is paper. A bounty, $100, in gold, for the head of the warrior Tahani." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Why?" Tahani asked, his voice flat. "For the kidnapping and defilement of a white woman," Louise said, not looking at Clara. "Her name, Clara Whitmore." The world tilted. The bounty was not just for kidnapping. It was for him, for what he had done to her, for the marriage he had claimed. Her rescue would mean his death. That night, the camp prepared to flee. They would scatter, heading for the deep, hidden canyons of the Sierra Madre, a place the soldiers called the Stronghold. Clara entered their wickiup. Tahani was not packing for a long journey. He was packing light. 2 horses, ammunition, dried meat. "You are not coming with Delche," she said. It was not a question. "No," he said, checking his rifle. "They hunt me. They hunt the woman they think you are. I will lead them north, toward the high plains. Delche will take the tribe south." "You will go alone," she whispered, her throat tight. "It is the only way. They will follow me. The tribe will be safe." "And you?" she asked. "What happens when they catch you? 1 man against the army?" "I am ND," he said, as if that explained everything. "You mean to die?" she said, the words a cold stone in her stomach. "You mean to lead them away and die, to save everyone else?" He stopped, his hands still. He looked at her, his eyes full of a sorrow that matched her own. "You will be safe. When I am gone, they will not hunt you. You can go back." "Go back?" she cried, her voice breaking. "Go back to what?" "To be Clara Whitmore, the defiled woman, the one who lived with savages. I will be an outcast, a ghost. I was a ghost in Kansas. Tahani, I will not be a ghost again." She stepped toward him, her hands clenched. "You said I was your wife. You said I was ND. Does that mean nothing? Do you cast me off so you can die?" He was trapped, his face torn. He had not considered this. He had not considered her will. "What do you want?" he asked, the words raw, forced from him. "To stay with Delche, to go back to your people." She looked at the man who had shared his deepest pain with her, the man who had held her while she wept, the man who was willing to die for his people, and for her. She thought of the cold, gray world of her father, a world of judgment, and she looked at the hard, vital, dangerous world she now lived in. I don't know what I want, she said, her voice shaking. But I want to live, and I do not think I can live, truly live, back there, not without— She could not say it. Not without you. His eyes held hers. He understood. He had given her a choice, and she had chosen him. We go, he said, his voice decisive. Tonight, north, together. They fled under a sliver of a moon. 2 shadows slipping out of the canyon, leaving the scattering tribe behind. They rode hard, pushing the horses, their faces set toward the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains. For 2 days they rode, the silence of the high desert their only shield. On the 3rd day, the scouts found them. They were in a narrow, box canyon, watering the horses at a small spring. A shout echoed from the rim above. There, it's him, the squaw man, and he's got the woman. 4 blue-coated soldiers, 4 rifles. Gunfire exploded, the bullets chipping stone, whining past their heads. Ride, Tahani yelled. Grabbing his rifle, he slapped Clara's pony hard on the rump. Go, do not stop, ride! He dismounted, using his horse as a shield, and returned fire. His shot was true. A soldier on the rim cried out and fell from his horse. Clara rode, bending low, her heart a drum of pure terror. She heard more shots. She heard Tahani cry out, a sharp, ragged sound of pain. She stopped. Her blood ran cold. She could not, she would not. She turned her pony, her teeth gritted. He was on the ground. His horse was down, kicking in its death throe. He was trying to rise, blood streaming from his side. The remaining 3 soldiers were advancing down the trail, firing as they came. A high, thin scream of pure rage tore from Clara's throat. She kicked her pony, riding straight back, directly at the soldiers. Her charge was so insane, so unexpected. The soldiers hesitated, their aim faltering. It was the moment Tahani needed. He rose to one knee, his rifle steady. He fired again. 2 more soldiers fell. The last one, seeing his companions dead, turned and fled. Tahani tried to stand, but staggered, his hand pressed to his side. A dark stain was spreading rapidly across his buckskin tunic. Clara slid from her pony, running to him. You are hit! It is nothing, he gasped, his face pale, sweat breaking out on his brow. We must go. He grabbed the reins of her pony, trying to mount, but his strength failed him. He slumped against her, his weight almost taking her down. We must hide, she said, her voice sharp with a panic she refused to let win. This was her world now. She was the strong one. She looped his arm over her shoulder, half dragging, half carrying him. She scanned the canyon walls. A thick curtain of dead vines, a cleft in the rock, a cave. She pulled him inside, into the cool darkness, collapsing with him onto the sandy floor. She tethered the pony deep in the shadows. The bullet, he whispered, his body shivering. She tore open his tunic. The wound was high on his ribs, a ragged, dark hole. It is deep. My knife, he said, his teeth chattering. Heat it. Cauterize. It's still inside. Tahani, she whispered, her own hands shaking. I have to get it out. She built a small, smokeless fire, using the skills he had taught her hands moving with frantic purpose. She heated the blade of his long knife in the flames. She ripped a clean strip of cloth from her petticoat. Bite this, she ordered. He looked at her, his eyes glassy with pain. She saw not a warrior, but the man who had lost his sister, the man who had held her while she slept. Clara, he began. Be silent, she said, her voice gentle but steel. I will not let you die. She took a deep breath. She probed the wound with her fingers, ignoring his sharp intake of breath. She felt it, the hard, flattened piece of lead. She took the knife. Forgive me. She cut. He roared, a low animal sound of agony. his body arching off the cave floor. But he did not fight her. She worked quickly, tears streaming down her face, her hands covered in his blood. She found the bullet, pried it loose, and it fell to the cave floor with a soft thud. He gasped, his body going limp, his eyes rolling back. He had fainted. "No," she said. She grabbed the red-hot knife, took a shuddering breath, and pressed the flat of the blade to the bleeding wound. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. He was alive. She cleaned the wound as best she knew, binding it tightly with more strips from her petticoat. She covered him with every blanket they had. She sat in the darkness, watching him breathe, the terror slowly receding, replaced by a cold, fierce resolve. He woke hours later, near dawn. The first gray light filtered into the cave. His eyes were clear. He looked at her, her face smudged with soot and his own dried blood. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "I stayed," she replied, her voice thick. "You saved me." She looked at their hands. His was lying limp, and she took it, her fingers closing around his. "When you claimed me," she said, her voice quiet in the small space, "I thought I was a possession, a thing you had taken. I thought I was a slave to your will." She met his gaze, and her eyes were not the eyes of the frightened preacher's daughter. They were the eyes of a woman. "I was wrong," she said. "In my father's house, I was a possession. In my husband's house, I was a possession. I was never allowed to choose. But last night, when I saw you fall, I knew." She leaned closer, her fingers touching the scar on his cheek. "I know what it means. Now, to belong to someone, it is not being owned. It is not being a slave. It is choosing. It is knowing you cannot leave. It is knowing their life is your life. I choose this. Tahani, I choose you." His expression, the warrior's mask, broke. The pain in his eyes was not from the wound. It was from a lifetime of loneliness, a lifetime of loss. He reached up, his hand trembling with weakness, and tangled his fingers in her hair, pulling her down to him. He kissed her. It was not the bruising, desperate kiss of their first night. It was a kiss of such profound, trembling restraint, of such slow, burning tenderness, that it unraveled every last thread of her fear. It tasted of gratitude, of pain, and of a shared, desperate hope. "Clara," he whispered, the first time he had ever spoken her name. It was a prayer. He pulled her down beside him, his wounded body weak but his arms insistent. "Shika," he whispered against her skin. "Mine." "Shika," she whispered back. "Mine." She came to him, her body settling against his. In the cold, hidden cave, with the army hunting them, they held each other. It was not a claiming, it was a covenant, a slow, gentle, and deliberate act of two souls, finding their one, true home in the wreckage of their broken worlds. Tahani was dying. Clara could feel the heat of the fever radiating from his body, a dry, consuming fire that her wet cloths could not quench. The bullet wound in his side, though she had cleaned it, was inflamed, the edges an angry, weeping red. He had dragged them for 2 days, his teeth gritted against the pain, his strength failing, until he led her to this place. It was a hidden cleft in the high desert, a place of pinon pine and juniper, sheltered from the wind. An old man had met them at the entrance, his face a map of ancient, wrinkled leather. He was blind in one eye. "Kale," Tahani had whispered, before collapsing. Kale was a friend of Tahani's father, a medicine man who lived alone, forgotten by the world. He looked at Clara, his one good eye sharp and assessing. He saw her white skin, her blonde hair, and he spat on the ground. "You bring this trouble, Binagi," he had grumbled. "My son." "Help him," Clara had begged, her Apache words clumsy but desperate. Kale helped. He recognized the poison in the wound, For days, the three of them worked. Cale chanted his low, monotonous songs, songs that seemed to pull the fever from the air. Clara, her hands steady, followed his every instruction. She learned to grind the ija, the sacred herbs. She learned which roots to boil for the pain and which leaves to pound into a poultice to draw the infection. She learned that the songs were not just superstition. They were breath. They were focus. They were a way of bending the world to a purpose. She, the preacher's daughter, found a strange, deep comfort in the rhythm of the chants, in the smell of the sage and the heat of the fire. Tahani, suspended in the gray world between life and death, watched her. He saw her working with Cale, her face smudged with soot, her hands stained with herbs, her expression one of fierce, protective concentration. He saw her, not as the white woman he had captured, but as the woman who had saved him. In this hidden, quiet place, Clara felt a peace she had never known. The world was rock and sky, and the smell of juniper smoke. Her life was reduced to a simple, profound purpose, healing this man. She dreamed, for the first time, of a future, a small cabin, a hidden valley, a life built away from the hatred of both her world and his. After 2 weeks, the fever broke. Tahani woke, his eyes clear, his body weak but his own. He watched her for a long time as she slept by his fire, her hand resting near his. Their peace was broken by the arrival of Luis, the trader. He found them easily. Cale's sanctuary was a known secret to a few. He dismounted, his face grim, and accepted a cup of water from Cale. "The news is bad. Tahani," Luis said, his voice low. "Delche's band. The soldiers found their trail." Clara's heart stopped. "They did not attack," Luis continued. "But they pushed them. Hard. For days, scattered them. Delche is dead, killed in a rearguard action. K-10 Chato's father. He is in chains. They are sending him to the iron houses in Florida." Clara felt the cave tilt. "And the others? Hania? The children?" "Scattered," Luis said, shrugging. "Some captured. Some ran to the high mountains. The tribe. It is broken. Finished." Clara backed away, her hands pressed to her mouth. This was her fault. The soldiers had come for her. The bounty on Tahani, the relentless hunt. She was the cause. Her presence, her existence, had brought this destruction. "No," she whispered, her body trembling. "Oh, God, no!" She fled the cave, scrambling up the rocky path, her breath catching in dry, tearing sobs. She sank to her knees, looking out over the vast, empty desert. She was a curse. Her father had brought spiritual death, and she had brought physical ruin. She heard him approach. Tahani. He was still weak, walking stiffly, but he was there. He sat beside her, not touching her, his silence a heavy weight. "It is my fault," she wept, the words torn from her. "I brought this. If you had never seen me, if you had let me die in the desert, they would be alive. Delche, all of them. It is my blood on their hands." Tahani was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rough. "I saw you," he said, "by the coach. Your people were dead. The outlaws. They looked at you. You were afraid." "I was terrified," she whispered. "But you did not beg," he said, turning to look at her, his black eyes fierce. "You stood. You looked at them. You had fire." He touched his own chest, over his heart. "I saw the fire. I chose. Shika. I chose." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "My eyes were open. Delche chose to fight. Chato chose to kill the soldier. Their choices were their own. You are my choice. Do not take that from me. Do not carry what is not yours." His words were a shield, blunt and strong. He refused her guilt. He refused to let her be the victim. She was his choice, and he would live, or die. With that, She looked at him, at the raw power of his will, and her sobs quieted. That night, Cale sat with them by the fire. He smoked his pipe, the sweet tobacco smoke filling the cave. "The world has changed," the old medicine man said, his voice a dry rasp. "The rivers are drying up. The white man's hunger eats the mountains, and his iron horse screams across the plains. There is no room left for us." He fixed his good eye on Clara. "The bounty paper is in every town. $100. They will not stop, daughter. They will hunt you because you are his, and in their eyes, you are a spoiled, lost thing." He turned to Tahani. "And they will hunt you, son of my friend, because you are ND. You will never be welcome in their world, and our world. Our world is gone." The silence was absolute, heavier than the stone around them. They were safe here, in this moment. But it was not a life. It was a prison. Clara was the one to break the silence. Her voice was quiet, but steady. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. "He is right. We cannot stay. We cannot go north. We cannot go east." She looked at Tahani, meeting his gaze. "My father's world. It will not accept us. They will put you in a cage and me in an asylum, to be pitied and shown as a broken thing. I will not go back to that." She took a breath. "But there is south. Mexico. The border is a wound, a lawless place. It is a hard land, but it is not this land. It is a place where we can be lost, together." Tahani watched her, a new respect in his eyes. She was no longer the frightened captive. She was a woman planning their survival. "Or," she offered, her voice smaller, "we could go east, far east, to a city, Baltimore, New York. I can teach. We can change our names. You can be someone else." Tahani shook his head, a slow, final movement. "I cannot be another man. I am Tahani. I am ND, even if I am the last one." He looked toward the south. "Mexico. It is a new war, but it is a chance." "We will need supplies," Clara said, her mind already working. "A rifle, ammunition, flour, salt." "Luis," Tahani said, "one last time." They set the meeting for 3 days later, in a dry wash 10 miles from Cale's hidden canyon. They had gold, left to Tahani by his father, hidden by Cale. It was enough to buy their new life. Luis arrived, his mules loaded. He seemed nervous, his eyes constantly scanning the high canyon ridges. "The bounty hunters are everywhere, my friends," he said, wiping sweat from his face. "They are led by a man named Harkin. He is not a soldier. He is a butcher, and he is relentless. He was in Tucson, asking about you." "We are heading south," Tahani said, handing over the small, heavy bag of gold. "God be with you," Luis said, his eyes not quite meeting theirs. He took the gold. "Hurry, this land is full of ghosts." He had sold them. The information about Harkin was not a warning. It was a confession. He had told Harkin exactly where this meeting was to take place. The $100 for Tahani, and another $50 for bringing them, was more gold than Luis had ever seen. They rode hard, heading southeast, pushing for the border. They rode for 2 days, the land growing drier, hotter, the mountains shrinking into jagged, dusty hills. They were in a narrow, shallow canyon, the sandstone walls rising 100 feet on either side. When the first shot echoed, the bullet struck the rock beside Clara's head, stinging her face with pulverized stone. "Ambush!" Tahani yelled. He launched himself from his horse, grabbing her, pulling her down into the meager cover of a cluster of boulders. Their horses, panicked, scattered. "Stay down," Tahani commanded, his rifle already in his hands. Gunfire erupted from the rim above. 3 men, bounty hunters. "There he is!" a voice roared. "The squaw man! And the woman!" Tahani fired, his shot echoing. A man on the ridge cried out and fell backward, disappearing from view. "Move!" Tahani yelled, grabbing Clara's hand. They ran, scrambling over the rocky floor of the canyon, bullets whining past them. Another shot. Tahani grunted, his body lurching. He fell. "Tahani!" Clara screamed. He was hit, a bad wound, high on the thigh. He was trying to get up, his leg useless, blood gushing between his fingers. "Go!" he yelled at her. "Run!" She did not run. She ran to him. Another bounty hunter, made careless by their victory, stood up on the rim for a clearer shot. Tahani, grimacing, rose to one knee. He fired. The man crumpled. Silence. "That's the last of your tricks, Apache." A large man, bearded and filthy, stepped out from behind a rock formation not 50 yards away. He held a heavy Sharps rifle. It was Harkin. He had been waiting on the canyon floor. He advanced slowly, his rifle aimed at Tahani, who was struggling to reload, his hands slick with his own blood. "That's $100 for you," Harkin said, his voice conversational. He smiled, showing broken, yellow teeth. "And I get the woman for free. A pretty bonus." He stopped, a dozen yards away, and slowly raised his rifle, taking careful aim at Tahani's head. He was going to execute him. Clara saw it, the cold, casual certainty in his eyes. The man she loved, the man who was her entire world, was about to be murdered for money. The preacher's daughter, the girl from Kansas, the timid captive, she was gone. In her place was the woman who had learned to heal, the woman who had chosen to stay, the woman who was Tahani Bina Allah. Tahani's pistol was still tucked in his belt. She lunged, pulling it free. The metal was heavy, cold. "No!" she screamed. Harkin turned, his expression one of pure surprise. He saw her, this white woman, standing over the Apache, her blonde hair wild, her eyes blazing. He smirked. "Step aside. Girl, he's a savage. He ruined you. I'm just cleaning up the mess." He turned his rifle toward her. "Leave him," Clara said. Her voice was shaking, but her hands, holding the heavy pistol with both an iron grip, were steady. She stepped forward, placing her body between Harkin and Tahani. "He ain't worth it," Harkin growled, his smile gone. "Last chance, woman." He aimed. Clara fired. The explosion was deafening. A physical blow in the narrow canyon. The pistol kicked, the recoil tearing through her arms, bruising her. Harkin stopped. He looked down at his chest, at the new dark stain spreading across his filthy shirt. He looked back up at her, his eyes wide, not with pain, but with utter disbelief. He fell. He did not make a sound. He just collapsed, his heavy rifle clattering on the stones. Silence. The world went utterly, profoundly quiet. There was only the ringing in her ears and the smell of gunpowder. Clara stared at the body of the man she had just killed. She looked at her hands. They were trembling violently now. She was covered in dust, her buckskin dress stained with Tahani's blood. The gun fell from her numb fingers. A sound, like a trapped animal, began to build in her chest. It rose, tearing from her throat. She screamed. It was not a scream of fear. It was not a scream of grief. It was a raw, primal scream of rage, of release, of a final, terrible birth. It was the sound of her past life burning away in fire and blood. She sank to her knees, the scream tearing into a dry, racking sob. She felt him. Tahani. He had dragged himself across the rocks, his wounded leg leaving a thick trail of blood. He reached her as she collapsed. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her trembling body against his, ignoring his own agony. He held her tight, his hand gripping the back of her head, pressing her face into his shoulder. He held her as she shook, his own blood mixing with the dust on her skin. He whispered to her, his voice rough, a low, fierce murmur against her ear. He spoke in Apache. "Shika," he whispered. "Mine. Shinala. My wife. Beijai, I am here. You are safe. Shijai. My heart. Be still. My heart. I am here. And Clara, held in his arms, covered in the blood of their shared fight, finally understood. She was home. The canyon was a tomb, silent save for the drip of Tahani's blood onto the stones. Clara knelt, her body shaking, the scream still tearing her throat raw. Harkin lay a dozen yards away, his eyes open to the empty sky, a testament to the fact that she was no longer the woman who had left Kansas. Tahani's voice cut through her shock, sharp and ragged. "Clara, the knife, the fire!" His words grounded her. She scrambled to her feet, her movements jerky, her mind numb. She had done this before. She had cut him. She could do it again. She grabbed the supplies they had dropped, her hands fumbling with the flint and steel. She did not let herself think. She only acted. She built the fire, her back to the dead man. She heated the long, bloody blade of Tahani's knife until it glowed a dull red. His leg was a ruin. The heavy-caliber bullet had shattered the bone, the thighs swollen and dark. "It is bad," he whispered, his face slick with sweat, his skin a pale, ashen gray. "I cannot get the bullet," she said, her voice a dead thing. "It is too deep. I can only stop the bleeding." "Do it!" he hissed, his eyes closing. She pressed the blade to the mangled flesh. The smell of his burning, of her own act of saving, was a horror. He did not scream this time. He only arched a silent, rigid bow of agony, and then collapsed, unconscious. She thought he was dead. For a terrible, endless moment. She believed she had killed the man she had just murdered for. She pressed her ear to his chest. A faint, shallow beat. Dadam, dadam. She worked. She packed the wound with the last of Kale's herbs. She bound it with cloth ripped from Harkin's own shirt. She was a creature of blood and instinct. She looted the bodies. She took their rifles, their ammunition, their canteens, and their jerky. She took Harkin's strong bay horse and their pack mule. She left the gold. It was a poison that had bought them nothing but this. She heaved Tahani, a dead weight, onto the horse. She tied him to the saddle, his body slumping forward. She mounted her own pony and led them south, leaving the canyon of death behind them. For weeks, they traveled. They were not people, they were ghosts. Clara was the hunter, the nurse, the guard. She shot rabbits, her hands shaking but her aim true. She tended his leg, which was a weeping, feverish wound that refused to close. She cleaned it, rebound it, and prayed to a God she no longer understood. Using words he had taught her, Tahani drifted in and out of consciousness. In his delirium, he spoke of Iste, of his father, and, sometimes, of her. He would wake, his eyes clear for a moment, and look at her. He saw her, smeared with dirt and his own dried blood, her face gaunt, her eyes hollowed by exhaustion and the memory of killing. He saw her, and he would whisper, "Shina Allah," before the fever claimed him again. She did not know when they crossed the border. The land simply grew hotter, the plants stranger, the mountains a darker, more violent shade of purple. She followed the stars, as he had taught her, heading south, always south. They found it by accident. She was following a dry wash, hoping for a seep, and the wash ended at a sheer cliff face, covered in a curtain of vines. Behind it was a slot, a narrow passage just wide enough for a horse. She pushed through, and the world opened. It was a valley, a bowl carved into the high Sierra Madre, hidden from the world by a ring of sheer, red rock cliffs. A spring bubbled from the stone, feeding a creek that cut through a meadow of green grass. Pinon and juniper dotted the slopes. It was a sanctuary. It was El Valle Escondido, the hidden valley. They stayed there. They had to. Tahani could go no further. He slowly healed. The leg was ruined, the bone set crookedly, leaving him with a pronounced, painful limp. He would never run again. He would never hunt on foot. But he was alive. Clara watched him, her heart aching. He had been a man of such fluid, powerful grace. Now, he moved with a staff, his body stiff. He sat for hours, staring at his weakened leg, his face a mask of silent grief. She had saved his life, but she feared she had taken what made him him. "You are here," she said one evening, sitting beside him. "You are breathing. That is all I need." He looked at her. "I am half a man." "You are the man I chose," she said, her voice fierce. "The man who faced an army for me. I do not care if you walk or crawl. I care that you are here." He took her hand, his grip still strong, and held it to his scarred cheek. Months passed. The heat of summer baked the valley. They began to build. They had his knife, an axe from Harkin's pack, and their hands. He taught her to make adobe, mixing the rich valley mud with straw, packing it into crude wooden frames. She, in turn, worked the wood, her hands growing strong and calloused, her father's daughter finding a new use for her pragmatic strength. They built a small cabin, one room, with walls 2 feet thick, cool in the heat and warm in the cold. It was not pretty. It was solid. It was theirs. Tahani, leaning on his staff, wove a door from reeds and vines. Clara built a hearth of stone, her hands raw and bleeding, but her work was perfect. She planted a garden in a tiny, remote village a 2-day ride south. She traded a silver button from her ruined dress for a handful of corn, bean, and squash seeds. She planted them by the creek, the 3 sisters of his people. She found a strange, deep peace in the rhythm of this life. Wake, tend the fire, tend the garden, tend Tahani. His limp lessened, though it would never be gone. He was no longer a hunter of deer, but he was a trapper of rabbits and quail. His eyes were still the sharpest in the world. He taught her to read the clouds, to know the names of the plants, to listen. She, in turn, taught him. In one of the saddlebags, she had found a blank ledger and a pencil. She, the teacher, began to write. At first, she wrote in English, a journal of their escape, a purging of the horror. She wrote of Harkin, of the blood, of the fear. Then, her entries began to change. Tahani showed me a new flower today. He calls it Bilu Tath Degai, sky blue flower. She began to write down his words, phonetically, struggling to capture the sounds of his language. It became their nightly ritual by the fire. She would point. Mountain. Tsiya, he would say. Diera. She would write. He would look, a slow smile touching his scarred mouth, and correct her. He told her the stories, the old stories of the ND, of how the world was made, of the first woman and the first man. She wrote them down, her pencil flying. She was saving his world, the world that Luis had said was broken and finished. She was saving it here, in her book. Their life was quiet, but their scars remained. The past was not a forgotten country. It was a guest that sat with them at their own fire. Clara would wake in the deep of night, her body rigid, her hand reaching for the pistol that she now kept under her pillow. She could smell the gunpowder. She could see Harkin's eyes, his look of pure surprise. She had killed a man. The weight of it, the sin of it, would settle on her chest, suffocating her. "I took a life. Tahani," she whispered into the dark, her voice shaking. "My father's God. He will not forgive me." Tahani, his own eyes open, would pull her back against his chest. His arms, strong and warm, would wrap around her. He did not speak of gods. He spoke of truth. "You saved my life," he would murmur, his breath in her hair. "You saved our life. There is no sin in that. Sleep, Shejai. You are not a killer. You are a warrior." Other nights, he was the one to wake. He would cry out, a low, guttural sound, his hands reaching for something that was not there. He would be back in the dry wash, his sister Iste's hand slipping from his. Clara would light the lamp. She would bring him water. She would sit, her hand on his back, and simply be present, an anchor in his sea of grief. She would not tell him to forget. She would just wait, a silent, loving witness, until his breathing slowed, and he would turn and pull her into his arms, holding her as if she were the only real thing in the world. Their bond was not a simple, happy thing. It was forged in blood, tempered by nightmares, and unbreakable. The seasons turned. The corn grew tall. Clara harvested it, her heart swelling with a strange, simple pride. She ground it on a stone, just as Nalin had tried to teach her, but now her movements were steady, her flour fine. And then she knew. It began as a sickness in the morning, a distaste for the roasted quail she had once loved. It was a weariness in her bones that had nothing to do with her work. She was a preacher's daughter, but she was also a widow. She knew the signs. She counted the days, her mind racing back. The cave, the night after the battle, the night she had chosen him. It was true. A cold, sharp fear, more terrible than any she had felt facing Harkin, seized her. She was pregnant. She looked at their valley, their hidden, fragile peace, and she looked, in her mind, at the world outside, a world that hunted Apaches, a world that scorned squaw men, a world that would call her child a half-breed, a thing of contempt, welcome in neither world. She was bringing a child into a war. She was bringing a child into a world that would hate it for the very blood that ran in its veins. She hid it for a week, but he saw everything. He saw her sickness, which she passed off as heat. He saw her staring at the horizon, her hands pressed to her flat stomach, her eyes wide with a terror he had not seen since the rancheria. He confronted her one evening. As the sun bled into the mountains, he took her hands. "You are afraid. Clara, you have not been afraid. Not like this. Since we came here. What is it?" She could not meet his eyes. "I am just tired." "No," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It is the fear of the rancheria, the fear of something you cannot control." She pulled her hands away, her composure breaking. "I am with child, Tahani." She said it flatly, a confession of guilt. She looked up at him, her eyes flooding with tears. "I am afraid. What world are we bringing this baby into? They will hunt it. My people will call it a savage. Your people, they will call it white. It will be alone. It will have no place." He said nothing. His face, which had been so open, so full of love, went still. It was the warrior's mask, the one she had not seen in months. He turned, his limp more pronounced, and walked out of the cabin. Her heart stopped. He was rejecting it. He was rejecting her. The shame and the fear were a cold, physical sickness. She sank onto the stool, her body trembling. She heard him come back in. She did not look up. He crossed the small room. He did not speak. He knelt. Clara looked, her vision blurred by tears. Tahani, her proud, scarred husband, was kneeling in the dirt floor of their cabin. He was kneeling before her. He reached out, his hands large and warm. He placed them on her belly, a gesture of such profound, tender reverence that it stole her breath. He bowed his head, his black hair falling forward. He was silent for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were shining with a raw, fierce light. "You are afraid," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she could not name. "You are afraid of this divided world." "They will hate this child," she whispered, her tears falling onto his hands. "Then they will face us," he said, his voice a low growl. "This child is not divided. It is whole. It is you. It is me." He pressed his palm flat against her. "We will teach the child both our truths, the truth of your book, which you have written in my words, and the truth of this earth, the truth of your God, and the truth of Usin, This child will not be half of anything. It will be whole. It will be ND. It will be Whitmore. It will be stronger than them all, because it will be ours. The air was sharp with the scent of pinon smoke. Winter had come to the high valley, but their small cabin was warm. The fire crackled in the hearth Clara had built. Outside, the world was a canvas of white snow and red rock. Tahani sat on a pile of furs, his back against the adobe wall, his legs stretched out. He was singing. His voice was low, a soft, rhythmic chant in Apache. It was not a song of war. It was a song of creation, of the rain, of the deer. Clara sat beside him, her body heavy with the child. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the rumble of his voice in his chest. She was, at last, entirely at peace. She looked at the fire, at the man beside her, his hand resting on her swollen belly. She thought back to that day, a lifetime ago, on the dusty, sun-baked plain. The gunfire, the shouting, the terror as Silas had pulled her from the coach. She had thought she was being captured. She had thought her life was over, a descent into slavery and savagery. She had thought she was a prisoner. She smiled, a slow, soft curve of her lips. She closed her eyes, listening to his song. She had been wrong. She was never more free than now, held in his arms. Thank you for listening to this story. We hope it touched your heart. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one, and share your thoughts in English. We appreciate every one of you.